Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to Total War Warhammer. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the correct and incorrect way to counter something. So my opponent here is playing as the Dwarves, I'm playing as the Empire. Now the reason he's taken these 7 gyrocopters with brimstone guns is because he expected that I was going to be taking an entire line of Imperial demigryph knights with halberds, or demigryph knights, normal kind, whichever kind you want to think about. Now a lot of people have been saying that currently the brimstone gun gyrocopters are an amazingly good counter against the demigryph knights, and to a certain extent there's a bit of truth to this. They are a good unit. Their range damage and their ranged, more importantly, armor piercing damage is very, very high, meaning that they've got a high chance of causing a meaningful hit against them. And since the demigryph knights can't really fight back, you just sort of park these guys somewhere, fire a couple shots, and sort of retreat back because their reload time's not the fastest in the world, and they'll probably get a decent number of kills against something even as tough as the demigryph knights, making these guys a good counter unit. Now, the problem is that, well, I don't have any demigryph knights. I didn't take them. And I just want to teach you guys a little bit of the proper way to build a counter army against an opponent. Now, I didn't know what to expect from my dwarven opponent, but one of the things that you'll always know about a dwarf opponent is that they will always have armor, just lots and lots of armor. There could theoretically be a player who takes an all-slayer army against me at some point in time, but that's not going to actually be effective. If you ever face an opponent that does that, you're going to have an easy time. Here, though, we've got a gun line, we've got artillery, we've got pistoliers and outriders, all of who are capable of shooting down these gyrocopters quite effectively. And my opponent, he shouldn't have thrown them away here, but I think he didn't know what else to do with them, so he wanted to take out these great cannons, because he knew, given his composition, that my great cannons would be a problem to his forces, and he very nearly does them in to a certain extent, but really, the gunners are just such an effective counter against these things that if they're guarding my cannons like this, there's nothing he can do. These pistoliers here, they go in and snipe one of them, forcing him back again. So now he's just got these tiny little groups of gyrocopters. Not going to be enough really to deal with this. He is starting to fire them at my pistoliers, which is actually a better target. But look at that, they just turn, they fire. Firing 2 of their pistols gangster style, just absolutely trashing these guys. So what my opponent's army back here is miners with blasting charges and crossbowmen, and you can tell that he had no real conception that he'd even have to use them. I think he thought entirely that I would be doing what I was going to be doing. The reason that you have this formation here at all is because if I decide to just try and find his melee ball with my demigryph knights while they're getting shot all the way over here, eventually they get up to the hill, blah blah blah, and then I get blown apart by blasting charges, disrupted, and held up just long enough by the miners with those blasting charges, with my poor disrupted charges, that his brimstone guns can deal even more damage, killing even more of my demigryph knights, and probably winning the game overall. But that's not really what's going to happen here, since he has to fight an actual full army. Now, this is theoretically an effective army against demigryph knight spam. It could actually work quite well against that sort of thing, but the problem is it's a counter only to that one strategy. It doesn't work against any other potential Imperial strategy that I can really think of. Maybe in a steam tank rush or something, I don't really know, but like that build would make no sense, because why would you? So the thing is, if you're going to be worried about the sort of cheese meta builds or the meta builds that are in the game, you can't just think about how to counter that single one, because there's a decent chance that your opponent won't take it. Okay, this is part of like an evolving game, but if this counter builds destroys demigryph knights every single time, then you can expect this to be used every single time, and then Imperial players will just take something else, and that's what'll beat this, and that sort of shifts back and forth. A smarter thing to do would have been to take something that can beat the demigryph knight spam, but could also beat this kind of army here. So what my dwarven opponent really sort of is trying to do at this point is arrange his lines as best as he can, trying to get them so that they're all matched up. Now, the reason that he did have to destroy those cannons is because he has no artillery of his own. This means that if I can get vision of his units and get my cannons in place, I can pound his miners and his crossbowmen all day, and he's not going to be able to retaliate at all, so that's going to force him to advance towards me, which is catastrophic for dwarves. Now I am perfectly willing to take a disadvantage and just charge up this hill against him, but it doesn't really matter tremendously. Here come those gyrocopters. They're going to try and attack my general, who's on foot over, or on a horse over here. He's actually perfectly capable of running away in time, but pistoliers managed to catch up to them and end them. I think they just rout. I don't think they actually die in this case. Yeah, there they go. So at this point in time, my opponent just has miners with blasting charges and crossbowmen and his general. So this is not particularly a balanced or effective fighting force. These miners are so poor at combat that once they come in contact with my great swords, they're just going to melt. Now, there's no real particular to the counter build against dwarves when you're playing as the Empire, but let's think for a second what you need to do when you're playing as the Empire to counter them. Well, for one, you know that they're going to have lots of ranged units. That's just a thing that dwarves have to do. They need, I would argue, even a little bit more than 4 quarrelers, but when you've got that many brimstone guns, those count as ranged weapons too. So you need to have lots of anti-ranged units, and that's usually cavalry. That's just something that you're going to need to do. You need lots of armor-piercing units. Dwarves have trouble with that, and dwarves don't actually have anti-large bonuses, so you can consider that part of the game as well. So this is why people take demigryph knights, because the dwarves don't have an easy answer against them necessarily, although they do have plenty of combined arms answers that work against them. The easy response against the dwarves is the demigryph knights, because you charge into, say, miners, for example. That armor-piercing damage, that high charge bonus, that high damage, that high durability is going to cause tons of damage to those dwarves. They get stuck into the fight for the duration of that charge bonus, and those dwarves are going to die. And this applies even if they take something like Iron Breakers, where that charge is going to be extremely devastating against those dwarven units, and you're going to have a hard time dealing with that. Now, this isn't actually cost effective. There are some dwarven units that can actually stand up to this. Like Iron Breakers, if they get their bombs off and are being charged from the front, actually do win that fight. But, how often do you see Iron Breakers, being enough of a front line? Like, why would I charge the Iron Breakers when I could charge something else instead? Here, I decided to just pull some flames there, and that actually did a lot of damage to these miners with the blasting charges. Didn't kill very many, and unfortunately I got a bad scatter with it, but, basically halved one of the units and dealt decent damage to another, so cannot really complain about that. Cannonballs coming in as well, so we're doing quite a lot. But what I've taken instead here is a mix. Like, almost every unit I have is armor-piercing. The only one that isn't are the pistoliers, and that's because I had 600 points instead of 700. I would have preferred another unit of outriders, wasn't in the cards. But I've got handgunners. They're armor-piercing. There's great swords. They're armor-piercing, and have a bonus versus infantry, making them a little bit even better. And we've got outriders, armor-piercing, and cannons, which are armor-piercing. So what we've done is we've taken an army that is perfectly capable of crushing, like, very, very resolutely, the melee component of my opponent's armies. And you'll see that that's exactly what's happening in this particular case. Now, if my opponent had invested properly in melee, this would have been much, much harder. But as it is, this is going to be, as it is. What I've decided is that I'm just not going to worry too much about these quarrelers. And we're going to crush up the melee attack so fast that we're not going to worry about it. And this is why we've got a Bright Wizard. Increases my armor penetrating damage by quite a bit, making it much easier for me to easily go through lots and lots of dwarven units. I didn't end up using it here because, well, I really didn't need it. Here you can see another vortex churning through, and this actually does a lot more damage than I think people give it credit for, but it does get another bad scatter, which is unfortunate. General chewing his way through a couple of the enemy units there, in particular crossbowmen. Got my great swords piling into the fight as well, but that doesn't matter all that much. So this was an effective counter strategy against dwarves. It's very easy to build a counter strategy against dwarves. All you need is armor-piercing units, because their good units are all heavily armored, and if you can get those, then you're going to win. But I've got a variety of different types of armor-piercing units. Okay, I've got the artillery that's capable of engaging them at long range and forcing these sort of quarrelers and so on and so forth to potentially go into disadvantageous place if he's taken too many quarrelers and thunderers. If he's taking artillery, I can go into an artillery duel. If he's taking something like this, I can deal with that, use the handgunners. If he's got a solid sort of infantry line that I have to crack through, but only a limited amount of shooting, as we have in this particular case, I'm able to use the great swords. I'm able to crack through the front line very effectively and get to the limited number of shooters before they can cause too many casualties. You can see their casualties are relatively modest. And I've got enough handgunners as well if he goes for a full-out melee assault, with enough tough, durable infantry that if he did melee rush me as the dwarves, I'd be able to perfectly happily just funnel him in a certain few places, fire through the gaps with the handgunners and the cannons. Pistoliers and outriders could go around behind and fire at them and deal a lot of damage, and that would be enough to turn the tide of that battle. So when you're building a counter to some sort of cheese, you want to think about other alternative armies that they could potentially build, and I'll show you one of the things that I'm sort of talking about here. So let's say that I'm playing as the Empire and I'm playing against vampire counts, and right now what's common is a ton of crypt horrors, some zombies or skeletons, and a couple of vampires with spirit leech. So what you need to do is you obviously want to have your general protected. The easiest way to protect your general as the Empire is, of course, to have some protection around him. So you can have this goon squad here, and that can either dissuade the enemy general from going by to spirit leech you, or it lets you counter kill him. So if you kill him first, obviously it's going to be quite effective. But what a lot of people tend to do is they say, well, he's got lots and lots of crypt horrors, so I'll just take demigryph knights with halberds or something like that. Or they might think, yeah, actually no, we'll use this as an example. So this is a common army right now. Then they'll take bunch of spearmen, and those spearmen will be sort of a front line that sort of holds up the zombies or something like that. And if the zombies are being supported by the crypt horrors, so all the better, because the spearmen are pretty decent at holding off crypt horrors as well. And this is an effective army if you're up against like an all crypt horror sort of thing. And it's like, the thing is that it's not a particularly beefy army in the event that your opponent has an effective counter against this sort of thing. So let's say that my opponent had enough Graveguard to tie up the front line of spearmen, and while demigryph knights with halberds are good against those guys because of their high armor-piercing damage, they're not actually that cost-effective against Graveguard. And if the Graveguard then get backed up by Graveguard with great weapons, they're going to be cleaving through these demigryph knights with halberds that are now bogged down in a couple units of elite infantry, combined with which is about as much as a demigryph knight with a halberd. And then the zombie, basically you could have 3 units for every spearman demigryph knight combo. Like, this is 1,700. You could basically have like 3 different units for that cost. So that would pull the spearmen down very, very quickly. Once they're sort of out of the fight, the demigryph knights are going to get bogged down and torn apart very, very, very fast. And you can mix it up with a few other units in there. Some black knights as well could get around the back, smash into the enemy, into the Imperial backlines if they're too focused on the front side of things. And if they don't focus on the front side of things, the spearmen getting attacked by just the Graveguard by themselves, pull out with the zombies, use the zombies to zone out the demigryph knights, and if they bog themselves down to the zombies, you countercharge them with great weapons, and so on and so forth. So this is not necessarily the best counter to a more balanced undead force, although balanced for undead is kind of a laughable thing to say. Now, let's see what you could take as an alternative. Well, the character setup still makes sense, okay? The character setup is designed fully to dissuade an opponent from sending in assassins to kill your general, because if he does, there's a decent chance that you'll kill it first or more effectively, because the Light Wizard Witch Hunter combo is extremely good at that. So, okay, next up we'll go ahead and take something like, and this seems unbalanced, but it's actually fairly inexpensive by contrast. The reason that I like halberdiers for this purpose is that there's no infantry in the Vampire Count roster that's truly efficient against these guys other than the generic Graveguard, the regular Graveguard. And even then, like, these guys will hold their own against them to a certain extent. They are not going to win necessarily, but they'll do okay. Next up, we'll go ahead and take some crossbowmen, and the reason that we're taking crossbowmen is that their damage is very, very high against things like crypt horrors. So if you've got the halberdiers up front, and you've got the crossbowmen behind, focus firing a couple of crossbowmen into each of the units of crypt horrors, these guys are going to hold out in the front very effectively. They're going to deal okay damage against something like a crypt horror. These guys are going to tear the crypt horrors apart within moments, and that's going to just wreck the undead player's day. It'll also let you really soften up the opponent's zombie line as it approaches you, because those zombies, you have to clear them out before you can easily kill the crypt horrors. Next up, we can go ahead and, yeah, like, why not take some Demigryph Knights? I mean, they are a very effective unit. They're an effective counter against that type of unit. And after that, I mean, we've only got 450 points left, and you know, sort of use your imagination sort of thing. Now, what happens if my opponent takes a more balanced approach to this list? What if he takes something that looks a little bit like this? Okay, this is an army list that you can take with the undead that works out pretty well. Well, I can no longer commit 3 Graveguard to simply charging into the 6 spears, because these Graveguard will not actually beat this many Halberdiers. But I could throw the Graveguard into the Halberdiers anyway and then reinforce with the White King, and that will actually be fairly effective. And I don't have to just commit that many to the front layer. There, I could use these Graveguard with Great Weapons as well as an additional sort of unit. I could keep my rear line defended from those Demigryph Knights using the zombies, but I'd have to use the Crypt Horrors or Graveguard with Great Weapons, and now I've got some sort of dilemmas. So this would be a much, much harder fight. This would be a much more even fight for both sides. And, you know, this counter, which does sort of defeat a Demigryph Knight spam army, you can use this against that. I do find that focusing on Fate of Bijuna with this instead, keeping your general on the ground so that he doesn't get shems as easily, and having this White King here, all combined makes it so that you can pick apart 2, maybe 3 of the Demigryph Knight units before they can really get into combat. That way you're only really worrying about 3 units of Demigryph Knights. And if you're only worrying about 3 units of Demigryph Knights, then it doesn't really matter too badly as to what you're doing to them, because like the Spearmen you can ignore, like that's what these 3 guys are for. They'll take care of that. But the zombies, the Graveguard with Great Weapons, your Vampire, your White King, your Crypt Horrors can easily tear apart 3 units of Demigryph Knights. And you know, yeah, no, that means I haven't assassinated my opponent's general, but you don't really have to assassinate an Empire general if you've destroyed his entire army, essentially. Okay, so that's a more effective way of looking at countering. I think that there's too many people who are looking for like a really solid 100% counter that will defeat a particular type of army 100% of the time very, very easily. But the reality is, if your opponent doesn't take that type of army, if your army is too niche, it's going to find itself in a lot of trouble. So anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.